We are continuing our look at the 2024 draft eligible prospects today. Could the Blue Jackets draft a defenseman? We talk about that on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. Now, today we are continuing our conversation with, not continuing our conversation, we are starting a new conversation, that should be, with Will Scouch of Scouching, one of my very favorite prospect guys. I'm talking about Zayne Parekh, who is killing the OHL right now, and Will's a very smart human. So we're going to talk about all kinds of things in terms of drafting, in terms of the Blue Jackets, like who he's impressed with right now for the Blue Jackets prospect pool. We talk about all kinds of things, mostly Zayne Parekh, and like Will is just great. Big fan of Will. So this is a great episode. I'm really excited for you guys to listen to it, and I guess we'll get right into it. There's a lot of interesting names kind of poking their heads up in this draft. And one of those names is Zayne Parekh, who some scouts seem to love him, some scouts seem to hate him. But we've got one of the greatest, Will Scouch of Scouching, here to talk a little bit about this guy, because I feel like you got some interesting things to say. So let's just kick it right off. What kind of player is Zayne Parekh?
Yeah, he is one of the more interesting players out there this season. It's going to be very he's a player where I'm definitely hoping. I wished I had a time machine and I could go forward 5 or 6 years and see what happens with him, because he's an offense guy, like offense first. The point production indicates that as well. The big question for me, and I feel like we can get into this a little bit more, but in the NHL draft, there are many, many, many players who play defense that score a lot of points. Some of them work, some of them really don't. And looking into why the ones work and the ones that don't work is a very interesting exercise, and how that applies to Parekh. I mean, part of me just feels like he really rides that line right now. But he's a player who definitely has a lot of that sort of offensive confidence and creativity, passing through traffic, dragging defenders and putting pucks into empty space that he can create from dragging defenders around. His ability to sort of step up from the blue line a couple of feet and put pucks on net. There's a lot of things that once the puck is in the offensive zone, especially, I see a lot of real strong positives out of Parekh as a defenseman. But to me, the catch is it really kind of comes down to what you're looking for a defenseman to do. Because, I've seen some people sort of say that his defending is awful. I've seen some people say it's not that bad. Usually when discussions get boiled down to that, I always sort of step back and go, well, what exactly are you talking about, right? Is Zayne Parekh going to win you physical board battles? I haven't seen him really do a whole lot of that at all. If anything, I've seen a lot of the opposite, just where he's kind of not super engaged in his own end. His rush defense, I mean, if you skate right at him, he'll clog the lane, he'll get his stick in there, he'll block you. He won't jump out of the way. But if you I've seen guys dropping shoulders and getting around him, sort of powering through him. And if they can even just chip and chases, right? Like he usually relinquishes a lot of space on chip and chases. And so to me, it's like, is that the type of player that you can see playing? You look at his point production, you could think, oh, this guy's going to play 25 minutes a night in the NHL and be a point per game guy and sort of be whatever. But to me, he's a player that I think like certain NHL teams will really not have any time for. Like think about how people on the internet really loved a guy like Dougie Hamilton, but it took him almost a decade to find a place that really deployed him in a way that it works. And even in New Jersey now, like there are issues defensively for New Jersey that come from having a lot of guys that lean offensively. So with Parekh, it's a lot of, there's a lot of interesting stuff, especially once the puck's in the offensive end, and a lot of question marks elsewhere. Even in transition, his offensive transition game, like quarterbacking rushes, he doesn't really rush the puck a whole lot. It's a lot of pass first stuff, and sometimes it really works. Sometimes I've seen him try to just go, get to his own defensive blue line, go cross ice from there, gets picked off, and it's coming right the other way. Like just seeing the ice and not sort of taking too much risk. Sometimes it works, and when it works with a team as good as Saginaw, that's where the points can come from. But for me, Parekh, there's a lot of things where it bumps him down my ranking quite a lot more than I think a lot of people. Especially when you look at the other offensive defensemen in the NHL who have really worked out in the last 5 or 10 years. Guys like Makar, Hughes, the only one I can think of that isn't, I would say, an elite skating and skill combination maybe is Noah Dobson. And still that player is also very, very high end and covers ice really well. And he's really built up his defensive game in the NHL. So, with Parekh, it really comes down to what you're willing to tolerate and what you think you can get out of him. But what I've seen out of him is a guy where I'm going, all right, I'll get a guy who can probably run a power play, probably if you put him with the right defensive pair guy on the same team and have a system that allows him to step up and be creative and cover for him and sort of play almost like a rover position, then I think you could be fine. It's just that's very hard to do in the NHL. It's a very difficult thing to do. And it's a big risk to me, but the stuff that he does well, you certainly come away pretty impressed. And I mean, the production is hard to ignore.
In a minute, I will continue my conversation with Will about Zayne Parekh. First, I've got to tell you about FanDuel. Get buckets for your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. $150 if your bet wins. You bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams. They've got quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. You can even bet on the NHL or the NFL is basically done for forever, but baseball's coming back soon. Bet on the MLB if you want. All of these things are available at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA, and also us, the Locked On Podcast Network. Yeah, so let's kind of get into that a little bit, because I thought you said a couple of really interesting things there. And so my first question, I guess, is all of these, like, I hate to call them red flags, but all of these, like, question marks that you have, are these things that can kind of be ironed out just by time? Are these things that people are going to have to, like, sit down and work with him on? Are these things that can kind of be mitigated by having a more defensive-minded partner? Like, is there a path to him overcoming all of the question marks and really kind of leaning into the offensive skill?
It really, it's hard to pin down. I'm not going to say that in any situation generally, I'm not going to sit here and say for a 17 or 18-year-old kid that stuff like that can't be fixed, right? Sure. But it is, I think, there are things that really have to develop well for him. And again, like, I've come a long way on this in the NHL, but I have a hard time trusting defensemen who score a lot of points and don't defend at this age. Like they are especially when they're not Quinn Hughes, right? Like Quinn Hughes wasn't really known for his defense, but the skating and just the willingness to use that skating ability to chip in defensively has come a long way since he entered the NHL. And I think that that's really benefited him. And so if Parekh can sort of become I would say a more mobile player in all four directions, not necessarily faster, but just able to sort of get around the ice a lot quicker, maybe carrying the puck a little bit more than he does and moving the puck a little bit in a more diverse way than he does. I think it could come a ways for him, especially offensively. The hard part is, is there going to be a willingness from him to listen when a coach says, I understand that you're an offensive guy, but we need you to be more engaged in your own end. Like it's in the NHL, like they're big, they're physical, whatever. There aren't a whole lot of defensemen who produce a ton that you are willing to look at them in the defensive end and kind of just forgive them when they're not super engaged. I find that that's a very difficult thing to do in the NHL. Like Cale Makar is as offensive as it gets, but you would never criticize his defending. And so it does, it gives you a lot of risk and reward. And with him, I also see in the NHL draft this year that there are, I think, other options that I think bring a lot more of what you might need more of out of Parekh, that I think puts him down the board also a little bit, because again, you're looking at what you're getting in a player. So it might come down to how you read him as a person when you interview him and when you talk to his coaches and everything. And by the same token, I will also say that Saginaw has been a team that has given their defensemen a lot of freedom and let them sort of play the way they want. Like Pavel Mintyukov was a guy on that team who was very much a bit of a rover. And it's worked for him, but the advantage Mintyukov had, I think, is he was a little bit more mobile and a lot more physical. And I feel like Parekh kind of doesn't really have that. But there's a smarter approach to offense and a creativity that if you shelter him initially and just sort of ease him into the NHL and really, like, I think that would be a test, but a good one. If anything, it's the ultimate test for an NHL prospect playing in the NHL, but like ramping him up from there and just seeing how far you can take him and how much he's willing to learn and how much he's willing to sort of tweak his approach. I think, a lot, I guess what I'm saying in short is a lot of it's going to be in here, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily out on the ice, but a lot of it is going to be in here and listening to people and refining things, because I still see issues, but if it works, yeah, you could have a really, really good offensive defenseman here. It just depends.
Yeah. I feel like last year was the draft of like the high end, stupidly skilled forwards. This year, the draft, I feel like, is leaning more towards defensemen. How does Parekh kind of match up in your eyes against, I feel like there's at least 5 or 6 other guys that could conceivably be top 10 picks in the NHL draft as defensemen. Where does Parekh kind of match up with, guys like Buim, guys like Dickinson, guys like Silayev?
So, yeah, it's tricky because, again, like I go back to how much I value defending with defenders. Mm-hmm. That's something that I've looked at a lot more over the years. I think that Parekh, as judging by who's here in the top 10, like I think there's some risk in that range. I have him quite a bit lower than that. I think there's a lot of other defensemen who, like when you watch an NHL game, are you really looking for the defensemen that play like a Zayne Parekh? Are you really looking for that on the ice, or are you looking for that Brock Faber type of defenseman who is that hyper mobile, physical, not necessarily just stand in front of the net and cross check people, but a guy who can get around the ice, move the puck, jump into a rush if they see a chance, and chip in that way, rather than that pass first and always engaging in the offensive zone type player. It's just, I find that more and more the NHL is trending towards that sort of more reserved, but still capable of playing offensively defenseman. So for me, like I have a lot of defensemen ahead of him. Like there's for example, like Adam Jiricek. I know he struggled in the Czech league this year, but that's a guy who might be one of the best skaters in the draft. Especially for a defenseman, he gets around so well, times a lot of things really well. Just the strength is an issue. Obviously being hurt sucks. And he did look a little outmatched at the Czech Pro League, but you leave him there for a few years and see how it goes. But like Zeev Buim, I find is a lot more sort of tactical and precise in his game than Parekh. I think Parekh might be a little more creative and lean a lot more into sort of, I'm going to participate offensively. Whereas Buim is a little bit more not laid back, but sort of, bird's eye view style of offense. Dickinson, honestly, I still don't really know what I think about him. I've seen him a bunch of times this year, and like one game he was spectacular, and the rest of them he's been again, like if you're drafting him top 10, you got to really know that this is going to be a guy that's going to play a lot of minutes. And again, it's like a lot of it is the defending. A lot of it is sort of the consistency and the puck management. Him and Parekh are both a little bit shaky there. Like Artyom Levshinov is a guy too, who I have grown to like over the course of the year, but he is, I think, a more interesting version of what Zayne Parekh is, where there is a very much an offensive-minded defenseman there. Like he'll go below the offensive goal line, right? Like he'll chip in everywhere in the offensive zone if he could. But I feel like he carries the puck a lot more and a lot better than Parekh does. I feel like he is a lot more of a physical defender. Yes, he loses battles here and there, but he's a bigger player. You can see him sort of playing a more interesting role that I feel like projects better to the NHL. Like to me, Parekh is hit or miss. Like he's going to be a guy who figures it out, really rounds out his game, and coaches can really trust him to sort of take the chances that he takes, because outside of that, he's fine. But a lot of the top end of the draft for me is about risk management, and I feel like Zayne Parekh is one of the riskier defensemen out there, and the production is hard to ignore. Like I said, it's really hard to ignore a defenseman who might score 100 points in the OHL this year. But that's, to me, a defenseman that scores a lot of points. You need to look at more than that to really know if this is a player that you're gonna put your hat on, because there's been a lot of offensive defensemen who've been drafted in the NHL over the last 10 years that aren't the best skaters. They aren't the most skilled. They're just always participating in offense, and it just doesn't quite work the way everybody thinks they are, and they will. And I feel like he really, really rides that line.
Before I finish my conversation with Will about Zayne Parekh, I'm going to tell you guys about Game Time, because I have just spent a bunch of time in San Jose buying hockey tickets for the Sharks and the Barracuda and all kinds of things. And I hate buying tickets on basically any ticketing app. I hate the hidden fees. I hate not knowing what the view from my seat's going to be. I hate paying way more than I think it's worth when it's worth. Game Time is none of that. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets. They've got last-minute deals, all-in prices, view from your seat. They've got a best price guarantee, so if you find tickets in your section and row for less on another ticketing service, they will give you 110% of the difference, which is super awesome. They're the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can buy tickets in 2 seconds. You literally just open the app, find the game, click buy tickets, and you're done. It's great. So efficient. And they've got deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Yeah, I feel like the best case scenario with this is like an Erik Karlsson, but then the worst case scenario with this is Tony DeAngelo.
Yeah, Ryan Murphy.
Real big gap between
like Adam Boqvist, Jake Bean, Ty Smith. Like, take your pick of these guys.
And two of those guys are on the Blue Jackets this year, so
right, yeah. So you would know, right? Like,
Blue Jackets fans do not have a lot of time for Adam Boqvist's style of
exactly
of defense.
Right. So the right team with him over a few years, yeah, I could see something coming from that. He'll give you stuff and he'll not give you other stuff. The wrong team will probably want nothing to do with him, and that's fine, right? Different teams can think different ways, different philosophical approaches to the game, whatever. And for me, not necessarily a guy that's super, super high on my list, but if he's a guy that somehow slips in the draft towards the end of the first round somehow, then yeah, sure, you could take a bet on him. And second pair power play specialist guy, okay, yeah.
Knowing what you know about like the Blue Jackets as kind of a development team, or like their development style, is Parekh a player that you think could thrive with the Blue Jackets, or is it?
Well, the whole organization is in flux now with Kekalainen going. I mean, I could see it. The thing is, like, I feel like Columbus has drafted a lot of these sort of high octane offensive guys.
They love to draft for skill and then figure the rest out.
And I could see it. I could see it. You know, you want to hedge your bets that maybe a guy like Matejchuk isn't going to be a top pair, second pair guy. Maybe. I'm not saying that's the case, but you know, you did just draft that guy. And so going out and drafting someone who I would argue is even more of a risky option seems a little bit strange to me, but he would fit in with a lot of the players that Columbus has drafted over the last couple of years. You know, very production heavy, very shot heavy, and just very much that rover style. You know, even David Jiricek, right? He doesn't score a ton of points, but he did have a lot of these sort of creative offensive moments and tools that you like to see once in a while. And so we'll see. I could see it, but I don't know. We'll see what happens too, because like the whole organization could look completely different by the time June rolls around. But as they are now, yeah, I could see it.
Yeah, it's been so strange because obviously I started a bunch of my draft work before they fired Kekalainen, and now I'm like, well, I don't know what they're gonna do. Does anyone know what they're gonna do? You know, but I wanted to kind of wrap up just by so I've asked this question to every prospect guy that I've had on the show so far, and I think I've had 4 different answers from 4 different guys. Blue Jackets are currently looking to draft 4th overall in the upcoming draft. They give you a call. They're like, hey, Will, we don't know who to pick. Who should we draft 4th overall? What name are you telling them?
Well, if I'm going by the average guys that would be off the board at 4th overall, so just average rankings that I track, it would be Celebrini, Demidov, Dickinson off the board.
Right.
I would go with Berkeley Catton. And I think that would be a great fit for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Like Catton is a quarterback player, right? Like you just drafted Adam Fantilli, and you still look at they tried to still play Patrick Laine at center, right? Like Fantilli. Yeah, I know. You know. Oh, I'm sure you know. But like Fantilli is a great piece to have. But adding Berkeley Catton to that to sort of add more down the middle of the ice for Columbus, I think makes a ton of sense. You've drafted a bunch of defensemen recently. You've drafted a ton of skill recently. Catton is a guy who glues a line together, right? Like he'll pass you the puck in any situation. He's a good defensive player generally for a guy his size. I think Catton is a guy who brings a ton of value. And at 4th overall, I imagine he'll be there. Caden Lindstrom is another one that maybe is a guy, he's bigger, maybe up more of that Adam Fantilli kind of, alley where there's a lot of talent, a lot of skill, a lot of offensive potential. Just the sort of processing and IQ side of things might be a little bit behind, like it was with Fantilli a little bit, but I'm getting a little nitpicky. Like one of those 2 guys, I think I'd be more than happy to pick up if I'm Columbus, but Catton would probably be the guy that I put my weight behind.
Yeah, that seems to be the kind of the debate right now is, and again, I've had a bunch of different answers to this, but I am kind of leaning towards Catton or Lindstrom. And I think probably I'm leaning a little bit more towards Lindstrom, but the concept of having one of those guys as like your 1B behind Fantilli, I think Blue Jackets fans should get very excited about that concept.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So if people want to learn more about Parekh, if people want to learn more about kind of the draft in general, I know that you do a lot of really great and different work with the draft. Where can people find you and that work online?
Yeah, so we do a live show twice a week, Monday nights at 8 p.m. and Thursday afternoons at 2 p.m. So there's one at time of recording this tomorrow, so the 22nd, 2 p.m. So, we do Q&A, NHL discussion, prospect discussion, wherever the heck you want. I also do some writing at Puck Preps, which is more focused on NCAA and just evaluating the 2006 age group over there. But yeah, I mean, there's mostly the YouTube channel. Scouching.ca, of course, has subscription plans where you can take a look at a lot of the data that I've tracked and a lot of the data and information that's out there on these guys, all stuffed into one location. But yeah, that's for the draft. For purposes of the draft, that's where a lot of my work is sitting.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow we will be talking about tonight's game, which I believe is against the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm convinced that it is. If it's not, then we'll be talking about whoever it actually is. But we'll be talking about tonight's game. breaking that down. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on Sirius XM. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.